So welcome everyone to another episode of Real Estate Mogul MD. My name is Bob Bosick and I am a retired C-suite executive. I have the privilege of speaking with medical professionals and high income earners and investors. We're here today to share the real world journeys along with the to-dos and more importantly, the not to-do. And I can hear the doctor laughing right now. We're fortunate today and I'm extremely excited to have Christine Meyer, who has a medical practice, well-established medical practice in Pennsylvania, internal medicine, and that's correct, Christine?
Yep.
Yep. We have an internal medicine practice in Pennsylvania. She has her own podcast, and we're just really excited to have you here today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to start normally with for my viewers to just kind of talk about, where you went to medical school, where it all began, and what was your interest in medicine to begin with?
Yeah, so I've wanted to be a doctor since my earliest memories. I mean, my family has several doctors. My aunt and mentor is a doctor. And I remember distinctly being like 4 or 5 years old, just watching her prepare for her medical school exams. And she'd have like human bones, laying all over the floor and I would touch them. So it's pretty much been in my blood since I was young enough to have a memory.
That's interesting. I grew up in a house with a medical doctor. My father was a medical doctor. And interesting, I'll tell you this, I was in the 70s. He had actually finished law school and decided that he was going to go to medical school after law school. He wasn't going to practice law, just one of these minds that was, kind of interested in many things, a brilliant guy. But back then in the 70s, I don't know if you knew this, you probably do, but he was 27 at the time. And there was a cutoff age to get into medical school back in the 70s. He could not get into medicine at the age of 27 or older at that time. I know that's not an issue now. So anyway, it was a whole journey. But my experience was different than yours. As a young person watching him, I would go into the hospital and there was one occasion where I fainted as a young boy, seeing all the blood and whatnot going on. So my experiences drove me a different direction than yours, where you were attracted to that experience. Where did you go to medical school?
I went to medical school at Hahnemann University, which was in Philadelphia. And sadly, it has been gobbled up by multiple corporate entities and is now part of Drexel.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll always call it Hahnemann. Hahnemann's in my blood.
Got it. And how many years have you been out of or started your practice and been going?
So I graduated from medical school or finished my residency in 2000, and I worked briefly for an established practice and have had my own for 18 years. So yeah, very brief stint as an employed physician, and then ever since had my own practice.
Wow, so you went fast. How did you went fast from residency, joining up with somebody and then being able to get going in your own practice? That's not something I hear as often from other physicians in their journey. How did you make that happen so quickly?
Well, it was a disaster. It was, unintended and, could have taken a very, very different path. But fortunately for me, it worked out. So I worked for 3 men who were a great deal older than I was. They were all in their 60s. I just turned 30 when I left there, and they just they didn't understand how to practice good medicine in that era. They were still very much in the old school days where doctor knows best and, you tell patients what to do. I remember distinctly the doctor that hired me telling me, he showed me his corner office and he had like the New York Times on his desk. And he was like, make sure you come in here and sit down and read the paper for a few minutes. He's like, keep them waiting 45 minutes, an hour in the waiting room, because that's how they'll know that, you're worth it. Like,
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
That's how I knew I was not going to last there. So, so they just tried to take advantage of me as the youngest doctor. They kept kind of like squeezing me harder and harder. And one day I just, in a fit of temper, I just left. I was like, no, I quit. I can't do this. And I got home, and my husband, who was just about to start his own pediatric practice, was like, are you insane? Now neither of us has a job.
I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore.
Exactly. But honestly, it couldn't have worked out better for us, because he had leased a space that was just a little too big for what he needed. So he was like, we have a couple extra examining rooms, maybe you could just pop in and see what happens.
So that was how it all began.
That's how it started. Yeah.
And are you still in the same location, or you've expanded to somewhere else?
Oh, no. We have since bought 2 buildings. He and I share one huge building, and then I have a second location, and it's just expanded tremendously. We're the only privately held primary care practice in our region right now. Like we were saying in the pre-show, lots and lots of hospital-owned practices, and so it's a unique situation that we have, that's for sure.
So tell me where you got your business sense, because I know they don't teach you business classes in medical school. And I know that many physicians struggle. They have this desire to, maybe to expand and be an entrepreneur or to invest. And, they have the intellectual horsepower, obviously, but they don't have the time, So how did you go about figuring it all out? Was it just trial through error and just making mistakes and figuring it out as you went?
I think so. And I'll say that it was no formal training, and I did not ever, set out to be a doctor to own a massive practice. But I really believe that if you manage your practice with the idea that patients come first, everything follows. And, that's just kind of been my fallback. It's not really about, how you market or what your reach is, or, it's really more about do the right thing and do it really well every single time. Do not compromise on the quality of the care you provide and the people you hire. That's really, really important, because, I could not have been a one-man show and had a practice this size. So in terms of mistakes, I hired many of the wrong people to discover who the right people were. And then growing that team that all just is 100% bought into the idea that put the patient first and everything follows.
It is all about the culture, isn't it? You sound like a seasoned MBA, a businesswoman, CEO. But yeah, that's certainly a philosophical approach that I agree with. It is all about the people, either your internal customers, I call them, or your employees, your colleagues, and getting that alignment that they think like you and that they have a focus on your patient or whatever it is that you're working on in business. And it is always taking care of them, and everything just kind of takes care of itself, right? I mean, I agree. Like, I almost, just preached it too much. It's just always about the people in the hiring process. Man, you can really screw things up with a hiring, and they can really mess things up quickly. So I understand and relate to all of that. How's your husband's practice? Is he still going along with his own, or has anything deviated for the two?
No, it's so funny though. We're very different. So he started his practice with 2 partners. The 3 of them kind of split off from another practice and started their own thing the exact same time I did. But their practice has not grown very far. So they started with 3. They now have, the 3 physicians plus 2 nurse practitioners, and they are so satisfied and so successful and, love what they have going on. I went from 1 clinician to 20.
Is that a function of your practice? Because you the 2 of you are going to have an alignment in philosophy, and he sees the success that you're having. So is that just a function of the practice that he has in comparison, or?
I think it's more a personality thing, honestly. Like, he could definitely have grown an empire if he had that in his blood. He just doesn't. Like, he'd rather sit and read his book on Sunday afternoon than, conceptualize the next thing he's going to do, which is what I do. So.
Yep. Very good. Tell me, what's the biggest, I'm going to shift gears with you and talk to you about challenges and opportunities for a second. So tell Tell the listeners, what, if you could, what are the biggest challenges you faced and what you learned from it?
I think hiring the wrong people. That's been the biggest and worst thing. Greatest lessons learned, but definitely the hardest lesson. So, at a inflection point in the growth of my practice, I brought on a doctor and simultaneously bought a building with the idea of, here's this doctor, she's going to be amazing. She's going to need a space to work. We're at capacity here. So at the exact same time, I made two critical decisions. I hired an expensive employee and I bought a $2 million building. And she was a dud. So now I had no doctor and a $2 million building. Those were hard. It was a hard 3 years, to be honest with you. And you know this, but I think I want every listener to pay attention to this. Bad decisions, you don't recover from them in a matter of months. A bad decision in a big business takes years to recover from. And that's really what happened. So I was straddled with this building, and it took a long time to recover from that. But in the end, it was great. The other big mistake I made at that exact same time is I held on too long to that dud of a doctor. You know what I mean?
I was going to interrupt you for a second, and I almost did, and now you're going to touch on it. One of the most important things in business is when you find the dud and realize it's a dud, you move with it. You remove the dud. And so many times, and I've made those mistakes early in my career also, right? I think I can help them. I think I can fix them. I know that I can change them. And you hang on to them. And the impact, you're right. I mean, even if you move swiftly, it takes 5-6 months to recover from it. You've minimally, right? You got to bring somebody, you got to find somebody, bring somebody on board. You got to acclimate them. But anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So that's exactly it. I mean, I just, because then, one bad decision feeds 15 more bad decisions. So I'm like, I can't let her go because what am I going to do with this building?
Right.
Meanwhile,
get a replacement.
Right. She's a sinking ship. My building's a cash sucking hole. But ultimately, letting go of her the minute that happened, and it's almost like back to the culture thing. It's almost like she was bleeding into the entire team.
Absolutely.
So the minute she was gone, I feel like there's just a collective breath of fresh air, and all the things I was worried about just started to sort themselves out. Exactly.
So how did you what did you modify and change in your hiring practices to eliminate this problem? Now, there's no change that you could make that would make you 100% accurate all the time. I mean, there's just impossible. But how did you stylistically or process-wise change? What did you do?
So, my first warning with this doctor should have been that she was frazzled finding the office for the interview. She walked in like she'd been through a hurricane, like just a train wreck. And I attributed it to nerves and, she wanted to put her best foot forward. But that was her. That was her person. She always looked like that, no matter what was happening. So I hate to say, but now first impressions are critical for me. Like if you walk in like you've just been through the war, you can't practice in my practice. It's like you just will not survive.
I've gone through various phases. I mean, I used to have, and this was probably in the middle of my career, I got to a place, to your point, where if the appointment was at X time, if you were 1 minute late, there was no interview. Because 100%. I just put myself in their position. And could you imagine being a minute late for an interview? You would be there in the parking lot 30 minutes early, right? You would have left an hour in advance to make sure you were 30 minutes early. And so you just go, this is a commitment issue. And I've always preached this to people. I'll train to competency issues. I'm happy to help people that are invested and they're not competent at a particular skill set and they need some training. What I will never train to is commitment, right? Commitment
Absolutely.
is a whole different thing. And I'm not your mama or your daddy. They should have taught you that a long time ago. You got to go, right? And that's what you're talking about. When someone comes in, it's about a commitment. It was a commitment to get there on time, to be prepared, to have a meaningful discussion with you. And it's just, it's bizarre how people take on that approach.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you pay attention more to those initial meetings and your intuition and your gut, and probably have a real formalized interview process now that you go through with a series of questions.
Yeah. And I also, that particular hire, I would call it a hire of desperation. I had allowed my business to get to a point where it was unmanageable with the number of clinicians we had, and doctors are hard to hire. So, if you were a doctor and you had a pulse and a degree, I was going to find a way to make it work. And now, I just tell myself, whatever's going to happen, it's going to work out, and I am better off dealing with the pressures of not having enough clinicians than having the wrong clinicians. And that took a long time for me to get to.
Yeah, those are just tremendous insights. And it just comes through experience. People, so many of these things are just learned through the course of time and over the wisdom comes from experience over years. So that was your biggest challenge, one of your biggest challenges and things that you've learned from. What was your greatest achievement or opportunity, and what have you learned from that?
I think two things. One, in 2013, I started a charity. My aunt that I was telling you about early on, my mentor was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And, through a series of things, I ended up starting this running team to raise money for families in our community that were dealing with cancer. And that charity was enormous. I mean, millions and millions of dollars. I wrote a book about it. Like, it just started all of these things. And I think having a piece of me and my heart and soul inside the community where I practiced was huge. I mean, I feel like my business took off after that. And I would never say, start a charity and your business will grow.
Right.
But I say, bare your soul, show people who you really are in your community and your business will grow. So it was that. First and foremost. And then the other thing, just from a very, medical, clinical standpoint, I just got really good at value-based care. So in primary care now, it's no longer about seeing volumes and volumes of patients. It's about taking really, really good care of patients. And that's been in my philosophy blood since I started. And so it came naturally to me. And if you can succeed in primary care at value-based care, you can have a tremendously lucrative practice. And people, I think, don't understand that about primary care. So I would say it was those two things: bare your soul, do something good for your community, and get really good at providing high quality care.
That old adage, treat them the way you'd want to be treated, and give that level of service. Mm-hmm. Tell the listeners what's the name of the book and where can they find that?
The book is called The Longest Mile, a doctor, a food fight, and a foot race that rallied a community. I love this story. It's just a story about how the charity started and how we got our footing. It's just a little easy book, very inspiring story. I'm no longer the chairperson of that charity, but it's still near and dear to my heart. Yeah.
Very good. And they can get it on Amazon or very good. Yeah. And you have a podcast also, is that correct?
Yeah, I just started a podcast this year. That was born of some bad clinical situations, things where I think if I had had a better conversation with a patient in an encounter, maybe things would have gone differently for them. And so I've been talking to patients about bad medical conversations. The podcast is called Tell Me More. And we are just striving to create better communication between doctors and patients and doctors and doctors and doctors and pharmacists and, everywhere where a conversation could lead to a better outcome. I think we all need to strive towards that in medicine today.
Right. Absolutely. If you could go back, I'm going to shift gears with you. If you could go back to that 30-year-old new physician going to work with those crotchety old doctors that didn't know what was going on in terms of patient care, just put yourself and transport yourself back in time. What would you tell your 30-year-old self with all the wisdom you have today?
I'd say invest a little bit of time. Like I would never say, don't do that. I needed to do that. I needed that experience to
You're
know
learning
how.
from that, right? From those negative
Yeah.
experiences.
I mean, if I didn't know how a practice was run poorly, I wouldn't know how to run a great practice. So do it. I mean, get that experience, but get out. Don't invest 5 years like I did. I think I could have learned what I needed to learn in half that time and spent the other half creating this amazing practice that I have now.
Yeah, that's good advice. Who is someone that the listeners may not know, but they should know? It sounds like, you are, very interested in learning and bettering yourself in your practice. And you're engaged with a variety of activities, podcasts, writing books, starting charities, have a huge practice. There has to have been somebody that made an impression upon you, or somebody that the listeners may not know, but they probably should know.
I would say, honestly, my aunt. I think that, again, it gets to the root of good medicine. She is a solo provider. She's still practicing, a primary care doctor, internal medicine, just like me. She never grew her practice beyond herself, but she always, always put her patient first. And I watched that growing up. And I think, again, if you get to that root of be the kind of doctor that puts their patient first every single time, from hospital rounds to in the office to after hours, everything follows from there. So that old school kind of doctor is what people just should know.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So you had, a mentor, somebody that was, in the field, could relate to your experiences, could visualize, those physicians that you first joined with, could see it in her mind's eye. Even if she didn't see them or know them, she knew them when they had a different name attached to them for her. So that's great. And I guess another lesson is, a lot of times people early on, they're afraid to share that they maybe have made a mistaken judgment, or they feel silly, and it's really important to talk and have somebody to talk to and work it out, because most likely it isn't silly and it just needs to be expressed and problem solved and figured out, right?
Absolutely.
So, you said that you and your husband immediately got into, it sounded like, business from the practice, from the standpoint of, getting involved with real estate and purchasing buildings, et cetera, pretty early on. How did you come to that decision? And again, that's another decision that I don't hear physicians doing early enough on in their practice, and some of the regrets that they've had and or shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we were just in a shitty building. It comes down to that. We were in this terrible building.
Get out of there.
Yeah, it wasn't big enough. It wasn't new enough. It was actually like a corporate office, and we had changed like the executive, little offices along the perimeter into exam rooms. It was just all wrong. And we just knew that if we were going to grow beyond where we were, we needed a different space. And then, we had the option of lease again, or buy. And we just happened to be in an area where commercial real estate was available and we could fit it out. And we knew, we were young enough to know that, hey, this could be a retirement vehicle for us. Commercial real estate in this area will always, always be popular. So we went for it. Not easy. It's a huge commitment, but it definitely is one of the best decisions we made in our practice.
Was it difficult or fairly easy early on to get that funded and to be able to make it happen?
Oh no, banks will give doctors all kinds of money.
They will.
I mean, it's so surprising to me. I'm like, really? But, I think we were savvy enough to stay within our limits. I think you could definitely overextend yourself because, like I said, people will give you money. But we borrowed just what we needed to do it right, and stay within our means. And in fact, one of our buildings will be paid off probably this year. And that's huge for us. It's huge.
Absolutely. That's a nice nest egg. What other ways have you, given yourself investment opportunities? Are there other things that you've done for your financial future?
Well, my husband's very conservative, so he's always, funded the crud out of, every retirement vehicle we can get dollars into our kids' college education and so on. But one of the things that we did early on is he managed my practice. And so he drew a very modest salary as my practice manager. And we would first of all, we would hold on to his salary for the whole year so that we earn the interest on his money versus paying it to the government. Right. And then we were able to maximize our retirement contributions because of that. We also created 2 real estate holding companies that actually own our buildings. Yep. And we pay rent to those buildings. So that's been a really helpful vehicle. We have some employees that are actually employed by our real estate company and not by the practice. Yep. So it's all those kind of little things that we just kind of learned along the way.
Have you figured out ways, what a lot of people don't know when they're purchasing real estate and they're doing holdings like you are. One of the things that came to mind before I continue my thought, did you put it on an accelerated payment for the lease, the ownership for 15 years and you get it paid off? Or did you do 30? Yeah, okay. And then the tax implications and knowing how to take advantage of what is allowable. So many people don't really fully appreciate. Oftentimes when in our business, when we have somebody come on board, they just have not captured all the opportunities that are available. And I'm talking about $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on a go forward basis that they have been missing, retroactively and retrospectively. So there's a lot of difference between passive income and active income and how you do that. And so anyway, that's great. You sound like the two of you are compatible so that you can provide each other's strengths where you have weaknesses. That was one of the things I learned also when we were talking earlier about business was to know yourself and know what your strengths are, and then make sure that you have others that are available to complement where you're not as strong. So for example, I'm very organized. I'm very, when I'm running a business, I'm very process oriented, accountability, KPIs, driving the business, things of that nature. But I get so caught up in that, you forget, certain elements of the culture that I know that I want, but I need somebody to do it for me, to be the rah person maybe, and to do functions and things of that nature, which I'm happy to do, but it's not intuitively something that I'm focused on all the time. But it's important to know yourself and to have somebody to compliment you. It sounds like the two of you do a great job with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So before we go, just take a few minutes and talk a little bit more about your podcast.
So like I said, it's called Tell Me More, Better Conversations in Healthcare. And really every week I just highlight a story. Usually it's a patient story about a conversation or a series of conversations that went poorly, that impacted that person's outcome and how they could have gone better. And there's this, underlying theme in almost all the stories that gets back to physician arrogance and ego, and how most of the time these conversations went awry because of that, because they didn't listen, because it was their way or the highway, because even when they made a mistake, they never were willing to admit a mistake and apologize for it. So I think if I could get more doctors to listen to this podcast and just shift the tone a little bit, I think it would go a really long way.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's been terrific talking with you and going down your journey and your career arc and how you did it. And I think there's some real gems for people to have captured, either about, hiring people and, moving swiftly when you have duds, to taking action when you see, when I opened, I talked about the to-dos and the not to-dos, right? And so you had a lot of learnings for your practice moving forward on what not to do, having had that experience early on. You invested in yourself and your real estate and your practice. These are all activities that you did early, and there's some really good lessons there. I think it's important to give back to the community, and I would, challenge people to take a look at your book and to hear that story. I know I will, but I just wanted to thank you again for joining us today, and sharing some of your experiences. And I hope it brings some insights to others.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.